Hey everybody, welcome back to the Plays and Fades YouTube channel. I'm your host, Gordo Gambles. Welcome back to another full card breakdown. This time for Dana White Contender Series. Yes, we are back talking some prospects and some fights on a Tuesday night we got going live. And as always, I'm joined by my main man, Liam here. We will be talking down every single fight from a betting perspective for Dana White Contender Series. Now, here's the thing. First time on this channel, we are alternating channels throughout the year. There's 10 weeks of Dana White Contender Series. We're going to be going back and forth each one of our channels. I get the even numbers. He gets the odd numbers. We'll be going back and forth. Make sure to show him some love. It is linked down below in the description. Speaking of down below, hit the like button down below. Subscribe to the channel. We are going to be breaking down every single fight here, and I'm really looking forward to it after what was a pretty fun week one. But without further ado, let's bring in our co-host here, Mr. Liam Picks Fights. Man, this has been year 3 of us talking some Dana White Contender Series, and it feels like we're getting some good prospects, some good ability to talk about it. And man, I'm hyped to talk some fights here, man. How you doing?
Absolutely, brother. It's good to be back. And last week, I ended up not even getting down on Contender Series because I had to drive all the way to Jersey. As I'm driving over there, I'm stuck in traffic. I realized I'm not even going to make it before Bet MMA lock. So I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to leave my best bets as they are. And then, of course, they go 3 of 4. The best bets were absolutely killing it last week on Contender Series. So ultimately, it feels good to get some of those reads back under my belt. You know, I did a lot of research last week, and I felt like it paid dividends in the end. Some of the size advantages, some of the weigh-in notes, things like that. And so I'm going to be doing my due diligence there. But as far as the taping for this fight card is concerned, it was pretty fun. A lot of these guys are kill or be killed, swanging and banging in the pocket, trying to knock people out. So it was fun tape as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, it was fun, especially for the fights we could find. I know we're going to talk about them going into it. Last week for me was an interesting one. I think I was a bit overzealous on that first fight of the night there with Diaz, and that's something you got to really pay attention for, is that we are out here, we are capping prospects, ones that haven't really been tested too much as them on the big stage, and there's a lot of really important things to take in and analyze going forward. So happy to have you by my side to do it. This week, man, we got 5 of them to talk about. I say we don't waste any time. Let's hop into it. I'm going to pull up the odds here so we have a good frame of reference back here. We actually have props for once. We have a good ability to talk fights. Last week, we didn't have props till midday through Tuesday. So it's good to have the ability to talk to them here. No round props, but do have inside the distance line, some round props and stuff like that going forward. So let's get it started with the very first fight of the night. We have ourselves a fun one here at 135, the 8-3 Cameron Smotherman versus the 7-3. I'm going to butcher this one, but Sharampos Grigoriou. That sounds like a fun name to say. Say that one 10 times fast. But no, we do have ourselves a fun matchup here. One that seems to be pretty binary, and one that I think you could go out there and have some advantages at the early numbers. Unfortunately, we don't have the early numbers anymore, and it's closing in as the day goes on here. But I'm not going to take this one from you. You're the guest here on the channel. Please tell me what your thoughts are on this first matchup of the night.
Yeah, I think that, this is a tricky one, right? Because on the one hand, you've got a New York guy, I believe training out of Law MMA these days, our guy
Yes.
LiamPicksFights Grigoriou. So shout out to them New York guys. New York's in the building. You know that, ladies and gentlemen. But as far as I'm concerned here, he's got his hands full with Smotherman, right? When you look at Smotherman's game, he did get knocked out once in the early going. So that's the biggest concern here. He kind of just got flash knocked out, got hit cleanly. If you watch that fight, you could argue it's an early stoppage, but always when you see that face down reaction, the referee is pretty keen to stop the fight. But as soon as the guy jumped on his back, he was defensively reacting. He had 2 hands on one. So he seemed like he was there, and he yelled at the ref. He was like, no way. Like, he was very mad about the stoppage. So I feel like Smotherman, he's a guy that, he has a lot of power. He's willing to continuously push forward and pick his shots, find better shots throughout the course of the fight. And I feel like Grigoriou is a guy that his fights looked a little bit more sloppy to me, a little bit more, he was kind of barreling over guys that were a little less athletic than him. Some of the takedowns that I was seeing, they didn't really look very technical at all. So it's not to say that he can't get takedowns and stuff here. It's just to say that I would like to see more from him to believe that it's like a sure thing. Excuse me. And I think that Smotherman, thank you, brother. I think that Smotherman on the other side, he's probably capable of getting back up here if he does get taken down. I feel like his defensive instincts on the ground are getting better over time. So it just feels like a fight to me where the right guy is favored. I don't feel like I need to get down on this price. When I talk about betting on favorites, I like them to have multiple paths. And I just don't know that Smotherman really has a path to take this to the ground. I feel like on the feet, he's probably the better guy here. And, to your point, a lot of significant line movement here. So I feel like if Smotherman comes down to minus 125, maybe then they get my attention, right? But it just feels to me like at the current prices, I don't feel like I need to force action on this one. I feel like more often than not, this fight probably ends inside the distance. Both these guys pretty dangerous strikers, but it's also that first fight of the night we saw last week. It can kind of slow down a little bit. Those guys have a lot more pressure too to start it off. So probably just going to keep my hands clean of this one, brother.
Hey, I don't blame you. And speaking of the first fight last week, he's already got a fight lined up, doesn't he? He's got one scheduled for November there. So we already see these fighters going out here. 5 contracts given out last week, and one of them's already got a fight booked. So interesting, let's say, mentality or mindset for these fighters coming in here looking to get that contract, right? Yeah, here you got to address the elephant in the room on my side of things, right? Is you have a guy named Smotherman, and he's not going to go out there and smother anybody, right? Like, it's a pretty sick name, but he is a striker by trade, and I think he is the much better technical striker in this matchup. And we're looking at this significant line value that you did go ahead and mention it. You can see on the screen right here. I think the early numbers on Grigoriou were actually decent, plus 240, plus 200. That I think that is a very good opportunity for underdog spot here, because I do think Smotherman has a clear takedown defense hole in his game. He has the ability to be taken down. He can lose optics that way, and he can be controlled in the mat. The problem is in this matchup here, is that going to be Grigoriou's first instinct? Is that going to be something that Grigoriou can keep up for 15 minutes? And once it does get down to the mat, does he have the finishing ability to go out there and be as dominant as you'd want him to be, especially as his line comes in closer? And I tend to lean towards no. Yes, of course, there's an opportunity for Grigoriou to have that path to victory, but when you're out here fighting a Dana White Contender Series, you don't want to just go out there and control grapple for 15 minutes. We don't know necessarily if that's going to get you a contract. Well, maybe the way that Dana's handed them out recently, but you have to think that you're going to want to go out there and put a stamp on it. You want to be dominant in doing so. And I don't think that Grigoriou's main path to victory on the ground is going to be dominant enough for him to be confident in a win that way. And instead, I think if we have a guy who's content to strike for 15 minutes with someone like Smotherman, I think Smotherman is way more technical. I think he's got the length advantage here, if I'm not mistaken. And yep, he's a couple inches taller there as well. And I do think he is just the better striker overall, way better technically. And I think Grigoriou does have some decent strike in his back pocket. He throws with fighting any intention, but he's going to be picked apart, man. I do think Smotherman is the far better technical striker, and I do think he has the ability to win the optics that way. And then it comes down to, okay, in round 3, who's going to have more going for it? And I haven't seen any concerns from Smotherman in that cardio department or in the ability to weigh down the stretch. And you did bring up that knockout loss. I still think the guy can take a punch here. So to me, the guy who has more ability to win the optics and win this matchup over the course of a 15-minute striking affair is Cameron Smotherman. Although that takedown defense is so, let's say, so much of a red flag that I don't know if I want to get involved on him at a favorite price tag at this point. So I may be with you passing on this spot here. It is one that it seems like, hindsight, the favorite could look way like minus 300 either way, right? If Grigoriou can land those takedowns at a high clip, or if Smotherman can get off in a striking, we just don't know for certain. And for that reason, I think there may be better options on this card. For you, though, anything that would stick out prop wise? We don't have any round totals, but where do you lean in terms of the way you see the fight ending?
It's very interesting. I feel like Bet Online made a little bit of a mistake. If you look at the pricing, they have the KO listed at plus 160, the ITD listed at plus 175 for Smotherman. So they're basically they're saying he's more likely to win by knockout than he is to win inside the distance. That's not math. So I feel like, number one, if you were to play the KO line at this point, obviously take the ITD. It's just a better number, gives you more equity as well. When you look at a fight like this, I feel like Smotherman by knockout is probably the more likely outcome, but the book has, dealt with that accordingly. I don't feel like I'm getting enough plus money there to get involved either. So I guess you could get contrarian, if you were looking for a long shot prop. What's the KO line for? Yeah, Grigoriou KO is only plus 400. I don't think, I don't think that any of these props are really jumping off the page at me. I mean, Grigoriou by sub plus 1,400 is kind of interesting if you think that he's going to progressively grapple here.
You'd have to think
But
that's
I feel like Smotherman's probably not going to get sub, but that's just a gut feeling.
For sure. And Furio's out here mentioning Smotherman's output as well. I think that he does have some decent output. I do think he has the ability to be pressuring at least. And although he may not throw the most, when he is throwing, it's usually off that front foot. He's usually the one pushing forward. And he's also able to throw from all angles. I could go out there and potentially wear on that gas tank of Grigoriou even more. I do think it's a pretty fun one to go out there and look at. And for me, the way I see this going is either Smotherman wearing him down with pressure and pace down the end and getting a later finish, or Grigoriou's path to victory in my eyes is probably a control-based decision, right? Getting those takedowns, controlling him there. That's why I did go down there to see what that finish only line was at, but it is minus 190. I don't know necessarily if I want that too often. It is juice, and I do think it's lined accordingly. So could be a pass one. I lean towards the Smotherman side, but Grigoriou definitely has his path to victory. All right, before I move forward, let's shout out everyone hanging out here in the chat. First one here was Mushroom, and much love for Mushroom. We'll give him a Hail Mary parlay at the end. Evan, as always, hanging out here. Ghost Gardner. Frank Newman in the chat as well. We do have that Bautista Blackshear fight announced. You see that one? Right off a Twister, right?
I mean, I honestly, with no disrespect, I felt like that said a lot more about Jose Johnson than it did about Damon Blackshear. Yeah. And that's with all love and respect. Happy birthday, brother.
Hey, for
it
sure.
It was a gift. It was a gift.
It was, and it's also interesting to see how he's gonna be cutting weight for that second time. It'll be interesting to see if we have a catch weight or not. But it does seem like a fun matchup on paper. Definitely a different matchup though, going from Cody Garbrandt to Damon Blackshear.
For sure.
Yeah, for sure. Dixon side here also as well. Glad you could make it here. Fury, like I said, got his words in there. I know we'll be talking about something he likes later as well. And as Dixon's saying, hit the like button down below, subscribe to the channel. All right, let's move on to what I believe to be the hardest fight to really break down here on the card here, which is the 8-0 Eduardo Moura versus the 5-0 Jiniana Silva. We do have some opposing bout orders according to Fight Odds and to Tapology. So I apologize, Liam, I'm throwing you for a loop here. But this next one is one that just simply put, there's not a lot of tape. There's not really a lot of ability to go out there and find resources on these fighters. And I was reaching out to a couple people, seeing if it was just me struggling to find the tape. It's not. There's not a lot out there for the Moura side of things, and even on the Silva side of things, there is tape. However, both these fighters have fought some pretty horrendous level of competition, which is typically what you see on DWCS Contender Series. But man, it takes it to a whole nother level here. What we do have in our eyes, though, is two undefeated prospects, the first female fight of the year as well, and one that seems to be one that, with both fighters having favored into the distance lines, right? Both these fighters are people who like to finish fights. They have a good finishing rate as well, and it seems to be a decent, interesting matchup on paper. From the brief tape we have on Moura, she seems to be really, really explosive, really powerful, good, active off her back as well. And she is going to be the much larger fighter in this matchup. Whereas Silva on the other side of things is only 5'1", extremely jacked, and seems to be more of a striker by trade. And she throws with fight any intention all the time here. The problem I have with Silva is I don't think she has the most volume. I don't like really what I've seen off the limited tape I have of her off her back. And I don't know how necessarily she's able to fare in these close grappling exchanges. Even on the feet as well, if she's not going to be able to land that knockout shot, which I'm not saying she can't do, but without that knockout shot, I don't think she wins the volume. I don't think she has too much of a decision equity here spot, but it is a really low level fight in my matchup, and one where I want to sit back and really analyze what we have in these two prospects. Do you have something else to really lean me towards either side here? Or how do you see this one going down?
You know, this is the fight that I've done the least amount of research on, right? So I want to just let the people know that up front, but I will share with you guys what I found because, you know, I always find it interesting. You know, whatever I can find as I dig into this stuff. So on the one hand, the Moura side here, she's managed by the same manager as Carlos Boy Felipe and Jailton Almeida. So, you know, she's getting a little bit of the attention on the Brazilian regional scene. So I think that Moura is definitely the A side here in terms of the promotional material for this fight. When you look at how I tend to size up a fight before I know anything else, how do they size up? You know, I look at the intangibles. I look at things that are, you know, predictive based on long-term data, and all the anthropomorphic advantages are going towards the Moura side here. So does it make sense that she's favored? Yeah, I would argue that it does. You look at the strength of competition. Neither one of these women has fought an exemplary strength of competition, but on the Silva side, her professional opponents have only had a combined total 19 fights at the time that she fought them. That's just not a lot of sample, like she's fighting people that are extremely inexperienced. Whereas on the Moura side, her opponents only had a 50% win rate, but it's over a 46 fight sample size. So it's just a massive, difference in how much experience our opponents have had over time. So I feel like that could pay dividends when you start checking all these little small boxes for me, and the promotional box. And it just seems like Moura is probably the side here, but it's low level WMMA. Do I want to get super invested? Probably not. But just looking at the matchup on paper, Moura is a competitive BJJ purple belt. That's the other thing that I took note of in my research. I feel like she could potentially leverage that in this fight. When you look at the other girl, she looks physically strong, but I believe all of her wins are by TKO or decision. Doesn't seem like she's a primary submission fighter, more of a strength and power based fighter. So I feel like Moura is probably live to get the sub in this spot. So yeah, somebody said that in the chat. Shout out to Mushroom. I kind of feel the same way, but it also is a women's fight on Contender Series, so it probably goes to decision.
Yeah, and it has been bet down. Money has been coming down that Moura submission line. So plus 240 now seems like a decent path to victory for her. But like you mentioned, one where, with these female fights, especially ones where we haven't seen either of these fighters lose yet, it is probably going to go the distance at a high clip here. But to add on to your points here, we had Moura open up a hefty favorite at minus 200 here. She was bet down, and I understand why. I mean, you're going out there and you're taking a blind stab on someone who we don't have any ability to criticize here. We don't have any tape to really go against, and that's kind of why we're seeing Silva be bet down early on, because she was someone who is powerful, will walk forward and throw the fight any intention. But from the let's say on paper notes we have Moura without really seeing it visually for ourselves, but we see that she is the fighter the UFC is looking to promote here. She is someone who has that grappling path to victory. I mean, 4 wins by submission, that's her primary win method right there as well, versus someone who we didn't really see fight too well off her back there. It seems to be like Moura is the side here. However, let's not force fights. Let's not force low action on low level WMMA, man. Like there's so many better spots, and there's so many fights this week in general, not even Dana White Contender Series, that I feel like this might not be the best option to go out here and bet. And I do think that it is one where we sit back, get our reads on this one, maybe look for potential live entries, because it is a questionable one here. I have to side with you in the Moura side of things, but a lot more to figure out, right? So I say move on to the next one here. But that was a fun one. This next one too is one I'm excited to break down here as well. We do have ourselves a fight at 145, 7-0 Haider Amil versus the 14-4 Emra Sonmez. And man, Amil's a fun fighter to watch, man. He does go out there, fight at a very, very high pace, and he is someone who seems to be a primary striker going up against a guy who is a primary wrestler here in Emra Sonmez. So we do have ourselves a clash of styles, and one where I'm really tempted on the Amil side of things. So before I break it down, let's pass the floor over to you, man. How do you see this fight going down?
I'm going to do a little bit more due diligence here before I fall in love with either side. But I'll tell you, from what I watched, I like the Haider Amil side. And the reason being, he seems like a guy who's able to scramble at a really frenetic pace. And it seems like that's something that bothers Sonmez. When you look at the fight that he lost against Liam, shout out to another Liam out there putting in some work. But when he lost that fight to Liam, it just seemed like he didn't like when somebody was pushing back on him. He didn't like when he wasn't able to bully. He didn't like when somebody was getting back up from his takedowns and making him work. And I just didn't see that efficacy from the top position that I wanted to see from him in those kind of fights against other substantive grapplers. And I feel like Amil here, he's a guy that I think he hits hard. I think he's really committed to his offense. I think he could take a better shot than Sonmez too. So it just feels to me like a fight where, he might lose a couple minutes here. I just think he's a little bit more dangerous. I think he lasts a little bit longer, a little bit deeper in these fights. And you got a guy in Sonmez who I've seen slow down. And in my opinion, it wasn't about his grappling skill. He broke. And I've seen it happen before. It's happened to if you've ever competed for long enough in one of these combat sports, I've wrestled before. I've broken. Everybody's been broken. It sucks when it happens, but that's what happened. Sonmez just broke out there, and we've never seen that from Amil. So that's why he's favored in my view, and I just think that he's a guy that could break him. So give me Haider Amil here to finish, actually. I think he's going to finish Sonmez down the stretch.
No, I like that look there too, because it is something that we've seen completely polarizing styles, right? Emil's a guy who he may slow down, but he's going to keep going no matter what. He's going to push through that barrier. He's going to go out there, keep working at all times. And Sonmez necessarily doesn't have that same mentality. He does tire down the stretch. He does have a solid, efficient ground game going out there, but it's not something that he can maintain for a 15-minute pace. And I really makes me question him here. Now, if this was a 5-10 minute bout, then of course Sonmez is going to be the side here because he does have that clear on paper path to victory, right? A guy in Amil who can be taken down, who does get off his back to get back up to his feet. Sonmez has the ability to take him down and control him. The problem is not only does Sonmez fade down the stretch, but I don't like his ability to go out there and be a control grappler. I think he's more of a, let's say, it's going to take him a few takedowns to land that one there. He's not the best fundamentally, doesn't have the best technique, but he's aggressive and he does that at a constant pace. But the problem is in not being able to get on the first try, he tires down the stretch. He can't maintain that wrestling pace overall. And I don't think he's necessarily going to have the most success keeping Amil grounded very early and often here. So although he's someone who is going to go to that wrestling early, it's sometimes his downfall as well as his cardio wanes down the stretch. And we have to factor in the fact as well that he's got 18 fights, but his combined opponent's record is still 38-45, right? Really low level of competition as well. Negative record on his opponents there as well. And something that Amil's going to probably be the guy who's going to be pushing the highest pace he's seen yet. On the feet, we don't have too much of a sample size from Sonmez because he doesn't necessarily like to stay there. He's a guy who likes to go for those takedowns at all times. But what we do see from him is he doesn't really move his head too much off the center line. He's there to be hit. And Amil is not someone you really want to be hit with or staying on the center line with at all times there. And I do think he does have the striking advantage. So to me, I do side with the Amil side of things. For me, the question is more so, well, if he doesn't win that first round due to that takedown and control time of Sonmez, he has to go out there and really dominate. It's round 2 and 3. And that's not something I want to see too much from a favorite. Instead, I may look for a live entry on that as well. But I do think he does get this done, man. Go ahead.
You know, an interesting note that I took down about this fight, Hyder Amil does not have one first round knockout, my brother. They are all round number dose. And he's got a first round submission on his record. So when you look at this guy, you know, he can scramble in the early going. That's what I saw from him. Like, guys wanted to wrestle. He was like, okay, no problem. He was looking for front headlocks. He was looking for chokes. He was looking to reverse. He was looking for switches. I feel like that's the exact kind of game that will gas out Sonmez. So Sonmez, I feel like, has some equity early, but I just didn't like what I saw from him down the stretch personally. And when you look at a guy from Great Britain top team whose primary win condition is to go out there and wrestle, it's like, shit, you know, that's tough. You know, it's Mark Diacase's done it. You know, some guys have done it, but that's tough for me to bet on. You're getting plus money, so there's that upside, but I feel like Hyder Amil also just a little bit more well built as an athlete. That's a side read, but he's also 33. The one last thing I'll mention is Sonmez does fit one like criteria bet for me long term, which is a younger guy with more experience, and he's got like twice the pro experience here. But then I just watched some of the fights and they're low level, and when he faced resistance against decent guys, he looked bad. So that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, and if you guys can't tell, Furio is a big guy on Amil this week. I was messaging him a bit in the DMs, and you know, my first read on this one was on paper. The style Sonmez brings is a problem for Amil, right? Amil is not a guy who's going to go out there and do well against a guy who can go out there and take him down and control him. The problem is, if Sonmez isn't going to get a finish round 1, he's going to wane down the stretch, and he isn't going to look like a good bet comes round 2 or round 3. And the problem I have with backing a guy like that is we haven't seen him himself have too much finish equity. And a guy in Amil who's never lost, but also never been finished, super durable, great chin, but also decent defensive tactics as well, is not something you necessarily want to go out there and back on a guy whose win condition is really early or not at all.
Okay, I lied. I got to share a couple more nuggets with the people because I've done so much research on this card and I don't want to let some of it slip. He's a Scrap Pack member, guys. Hyder Amil. Okay, he trains with Nick and Nate Diaz. He was literally in Nate Diaz's camp for the Jake Paul fight. You understand? Like, this guy is getting his cardio in. This guy is putting in the work. This guy is surrounded by the right people. Gilbert Melendez is his head training coach. It's like he's got a lot of connections to the UFC. I feel like that is also a little bit of writing on the wall. Personal opinion.
Hey, Well, it seems like we agree on the Amil side of things. The problem is we're missing out on a little bit of line value here. It is moving a bit in that direction. I tend to agree with the line, but we see late finishes, right? What are these late round props? Well, they're kind of juice, right? Plus 650, plus 375 in round two. It seems like they are favoring him to end or to win by knockout in those later rounds. And although I still agree with that being the path to victory, do you see any value on that?
Let me pull up this. I'm gonna look on my own screen here just for clarity's sake. I feel like I'm a sick person, as you know. So what I would
Yeah.
look at is a mill ITD at plus 125 and a mill by sub plus 900. This guy Sonmez is going to shoot a million times. A mill likes to kill people on the feed. He definitely prefers that. But if this guy continues to shoot, continues to put his head in bad positions, I think this guy, zero discrimination. He will do whatever it takes to win the fight. And I think if he's offered a neck, I think he'll take it. So, it would be, a primary play on the plus money ITD if I was to do that. And then, a sprinkle on the sub, right? It's to play into the upside of the fact that they're saying he wins ITD almost 50% of the time, but he wins by sub, a very small fraction of the time. It's like, I don't know, this other guy's going to push the grappling relentlessly, even when he gets tired. We've seen that in his other fights.
Yeah, and he shoots from further and further out, as Furio says. He is so committed in that grappling that if he gets
Guillotine
tired, that's
assassin,
still,
baby.
yep, it's still gonna be where he goes, right? So I don't mind that spot there. Seems like we got a good read on that one. I'll probably get to the
A
window on the
Nate
mill side of
Diaz
things.
protege hitting a guillotine in a UFC fight. Wouldn't that be some?
Ooh, I have some good plus money too. But no, it is a good one. I'm glad we see eye to eye on that one. Dixon's trying to shout out your BJJ bias, but hey, which one pays better?
Yeah,
We've
my
had this
BJJ
conversation.
bias got me on Amarim KO plus 1600 over the weekend. Bang. What's up, dog?
You're making him scared now. You got to be nice to him here. No, but with that being said, I'm glad we see eye to eye on that one. Hopefully that makes Furio happy as well because I know he's a big Emil guy, and it does seem like one where the path to victory for Sonmez is there on paper, but with his style, with his cardio, it doesn't seem like it's one that he can be able to be realized too often here. So I'm with you on Emil. Let's move on to our. Let's say the one that I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts about the most, because this is a pretty interesting one in my eyes. We do have some big boys going at it. Light heavyweights, 11-1 Ibo Aslan, 12-2 Paulo Renato Jr. Sorry, I apologize. Before we go on, Sonmez also missed weight today, which is not something you want to see. He came in, was it a pound and a half overweight? That doesn't seem like necessarily the best thing to see when we're already talking about a guy who's going to gas down the stretch against a guy who's got great cardio. I think that's only playing into the line
What does
more.
that do to your motivation when only Jake Hadley has ever gotten signed when missing weight? Just saying.
I'm telling you, man, it seems like more things are lining up for the Emil side of things here as well. I had to bring up that weight miss. But back to our light heavyweight matchup, we have Ibo Aslan, 11-1, Paulo Renato Jr., 12-2. Paulo Renato Jr. making his second stint on DWCS Contender Series after losing to Jamal Pogues last year. Ibo Aslan, a tank of a man and a guy who I do think I'm interested to seeing here because, man, ooh, talking about this one's got me all messed up here. I'm going to clear my throat. You break this one down while I get my notes pulled up.
Absolutely, brother. So, oh boy, this is a tricky one, right? Ibo Aslan, I found some interesting stuff here, as far as I'm concerned. This was a guy in 2020 who was posting on Instagram, I have signed for my first UFC fight. I'll be fighting in Contender Series over the summer. Y'all see that on his Tapology anywhere? Nope. I don't know what happened there. I'm not sure. But what I can tell you is he used to have a different management group that he references in those posts. He's like, thanks to my management, blah, blah, blah. I just got signed to the UFC, whatever. Then, you just see him fighting all these random guys, including future UFC fighter Anton Turkalj.
Pleasure,
And that was
man.
where it all went off the rails as well. So, he lost that fight to Turkalj and he had a lot of success in that fight, but he kind of wrestled himself into a hole. Like at a certain point, he was so exhausted that he looked drunk and he got up from a takedown exchange where he was on top. Turkalj started threatening with subs from his back and he literally just stood up and was like half ready to fall over. It looked like a gust of wind and this guy was going to hit the deck. So that for me is a massive red flag. He just seems like a guy who comes out and bullies people, bodies people in the early going. But then you look at the guys he trains with, you look at the situation he's been in. He seems like a guy who's been groomed for success. Like he looks like the way better quality of athlete. If you ask me, like just to size these two guys up. And the thing about his opponent here in Renato Jr. is he's a guy that he fought all the way down at 170 pounds. He fought at middleweight. He came back at heavyweight, and now he's coming back down to light heavyweight. So I don't think that heavyweight was the right weight class for him. But the fact that he landed like 25 head strikes against Jamal Pogues is like a crime against humanity. Mick Parkin looked like Tyson Fury out there, just like absolutely boxing a clinic on this guy. So I think when you look at this fight, Paulo Renato, what he does well is low kick. He's a good low kicker. He's a guy that's got some fundamental kickboxing. I think he's a Brazilian kickboxing champion. Nothing in terms of world accolades, but national accolades in a place where people know how to kickbox. So fair enough. He got a heavyweight knockout, and then he went down to light heavyweight for 2 MMA bouts, crushed some cans, and now he's back to the Contender series. So he seems like a guy who's taken the right steps to get back here. And he may be in a better position in terms of how he's been tested to win this fight. In terms of athletic upside, I feel like Aslan is probably the side here in terms of who's going to win round 1 in this fight. I think that Aslan is just a way more dangerous fighter in the early going. He seems to have more natural power in his hands. And if you watch that Turkalj fight, on multiple occasions, he kicks Turkalj off of his feet with his low kicks. Like his low kicks are booming and they're really effective. But he just can't keep it up, in my opinion, because of how he fights. Everything's high impact. The takedowns are all muscle. The kicks. A lot of what he does just saps his energy. So he seems like a better athlete, more dynamic, more marketable. But he also seems like a guy who's hard to trust at Chalk because he seems like a guy who's liable to just completely fall apart down the stretch. So Renato seems like the more proven guy. Over 15 minutes. The ABCs do say always bet on cardio, but the plus money has kind of evaporated. I would wait. If more money came back in on the favorite, maybe I would get involved, but it just seems like I missed the boat here on the early numbers on Renato Jr. And I do think Aslan is very live to knock him out in the early going. I think that the under 2.5 for the fight doesn't go here is very solid in all likelihood. Now, the one danger is Aslan could be in much better shape. Since that last time he gassed out against Turkalj. But I mean, I don't know. Like you can see, he seems like a guy who kind of fights like a meathead. So that's my opinion.
Well, I'm ready to look like an idiot here because I do have myself a stance on Ibo Aslan, and it's one where I completely understand the risks, right? Like I'm going in there and I'm taking a guy who has been a notorious gasser, a guy who throws everything through his punch, who has fought some level of competition down the road too as well. But to me, he has a ton of advantages here. He's going to be the much larger fighter, through with much more fight-ending intention. Is a guy who looks to be training with the right way as well, and is a very powerful guy early on. And I do think that skill for skill, he has way more to offer. The problem with him is, can we trust him for 15 minutes? No, but I don't think that he necessarily has to worry about going 15 minutes. I think he has the capabilities to get Renato out of there early, and I do think that skill for skill, he's the much better fighter. Now, I do have myself a stance early here. I expected the line to move big. I got -110 on Ibo Aslan. That's you might be able to get that, honestly, the way this line's moving. It could go back to that. I just think that out of Pick'em, I'm willing to take the risk of the cardio dump, right? If we're talking about implications here, a 55% or a 50% implied for a guy to be the better fighter, I'm going to take that because I do think that he does have capability to lose this fight. But trusting a guy in Renato, who I think major win condition is the other guy gassing out, and I don't see Renato having the skill to really compete with him at cardio parity, isn't something that I really want to trust this guy at such a high implication rate. So to me, the side here, Aslan, he is a much more powerful guy. He himself is going to start early, go out there, throw a fight, any intention. If he even gets some top position, great ground and pound as well. Leg kicks. And the thing too about that Turkalj fight is, he could have finished like anybody there. It's just Turkalj is just extremely durable. He was able to eat all that stuff there, really come back and swarm him later. And I think if he has that same offensive minded skill set against Renato here, he gets Renato out of there being the bigger guy, being as powerful as he is. So I took a shot on Aslan. I don't mind the inside the distance line instead. I don't mind any way you're going to hit a target. I don't mind passing because this is a really sloppy fight as well. But for me, in my eyes, when I was looking to break down this fight, I saw the guy who is just the better overall mixed martial artist in my guy, the guy who has more power upside, more finish threat, and a guy who I think is more marketable and in a better headspace right now, and that being Ibo Aslan. Could be wrong. He could cardio dump, but I'm willing to take that minus 110 risk here, and I did take my shot on Ibo Aslan.
Well, I mean, I think that's a great price. And the other thing I'll mention is there are a lot of check boxes that I like on the Ibo Aslan side. And starting with his new manager, I said he switched managers. It is Dominance MMA Ali Abdullah Sleaze. You don't have to like him, but he gets good opportunities for his clients more often than not. His last 3 weeks, he's been training at Extreme Couture, getting in exactly the right work that you'd want to your point, right before a big fight like this. His home training situation is in Otto's gym in Vienna, Austria. So he's getting the right work on the ground as well. And he did training camps at ATT Zagreb and Tiger Muay Thai in recent years. So he's been putting in the work, traveling around the world to get better. So I feel like we could see a good product. He just hasn't been able to show it against quality competition. So this is his opportunity. And, I think you got a good price if it's at pick-em odds. I would favor him at pick-em odds, but I think that it might blow out again by fight time. And I would think that this is probably a pretty close fight. Especially if it gets extended over 1.5 rounds.
It is, and it's not to say that Ibo doesn't have his flaws. It's just when I'm looking at Paulo Renato, right, a guy who was jabbed up and landed on so many times by Pogues and really displayed not the best head movement, going against a guy who is as powerful as Aslan here is not something I want to see too much if I did want to back Renato here, as well as the fact that his style doesn't really go out there and have the same volume or cardio you want to see as a guy against a guy who fades as much as Aslan. It may not matter because Aslan could just go out there and fold in that third round if it gets there. But really, it's not like Renato's perfect in the cardio scene either. It doesn't look like he's going to go out there and push a solid enough pace to tire out Aslan. And for that reason, maybe a live entry on Renato if you're looking to back him here. It should be Ibo with the round one upside and a lot of the ways to win that way as well. Betting line wise, round one for Aslan, plus 215. Honestly, better than I expected, considering I thought that was one of his major win conditions here as well. But it is one where it's favored to him to win by TKO, plus 115 there, plus 100 for him to win us at the distance, even though he's only minus 125 there. So is any meat in the bone there? And are you looking to look towards any Renato round props then, like the Renato round 3?
My brother, I know that people are going to laugh in the comments.
I'm ready.
How is he plus 100 to win the fight inside the distance and plus 1,600 to win the fight by sub? That doesn't math. You look at Renato Jr. In my notes, I said, fighting style, Brazilian kickboxing champion, negative grappler, 1-1 career to the sub. In fairness, that sub loss was back in 2014. But he does not strike me as a guy who works on his grappling all that often. So if the more physical, powerful guy picked him up, turned him sideways, slammed him on the ground, and choked him, would you really be that surprised? I mean, I think that's busted personally.
Hey, I don't mind it. They're a decent look. It is a guy with 11 KO wins, but he's just so powerful, so explosive. Sometimes it's the style you get, right? When you're facing cans, you can knock them out if he's gonna have some. If he's gonna have
look at the guys he was fighting. If he didn't knock him out, it would be a crime. He was literally hitting these guys with low kicks and they're falling over. Like that one guy, I think it said he was 31. I was like, you gotta be kidding me. Come on. That guy looked like he was in his mid-50s. Like, he had no business out there with him.
Another one though that we see pretty close here, and I'm excited that we're lining up on these ones. Let's see if we line up on the main event as well. There we go. All right. Before we do that, though, make sure to like button down below, subscribe to the channel. We got a bunch of us hanging out in here. Shout out to everybody hanging out in the chat. Fury, I'm still making sure that we know the Sonmez is getting flatline there. I'm there with you. Dixie, making sure we know that if Pogue gets a contract, anyone can. We did see 5 last week. So, hey, you never know. Go ahead.
Dude, you know what I have to say, Gordo? I just looked back. I called Jamal Pogues over Paulo Hanato. I have to call this guy Aslan over him. I have to. If I call Jamal Pogues over this guy, I probably got to go with Aslan, bro.
Yeah, you might have to hear it, but we understand the risks. It's just I do like this matchup for him here. Happy to see you with me eventually there. Yeah, I did get too excited there. Thanks for calling me out there, Evan. Mushrooms on the dog there, and Renato, not too bad. And then third member of the Four Horsemen here, Wiz is here, hanging out. So appreciate everybody there. Cheeky Elbow as well. And then we already got here. We have ourselves to talk about the main event. So let's waste no more time. Let's dive into it. We do have ourselves a fun one between two champions, nonetheless, too. But we have the 12-1 George Hardwick versus the 14-3 Al Salwaldy. Fun fight, man. Fun fight, and one where the line is blown up because people are anticipating this Dana White Contender Series debut for Hardwick, a guy who is highly touted, a guy who is a fun fighter. Go out there and watch, but he being the champion in Cage Warrior, there are high expectations for him, and for good reason. Very well-rounded guy, very good striking in his own right, and he wants to keep it there. He does some good takedown defense, though, good guillotine, and he just is very well-rounded to the point where you want to back him. He's got good experience in his own right, and that's why he's going to sit at this hefty price tag here as well. Flip side of things, Abdul Karim Al Salwaldy is a champion's own right. Fury FC, I believe, Cage Fury, a very good fighter in his own right, a guy who is going to be more wrestling based in the side of things. But the big red flag for him is him having 3 losses by knockout, right? That seems to be the way he loses fights here as well. But it's one that is going to be a tough matchup for him because he's getting out here. He's facing that champion at Cage Warrior, a guy that people like here in Hardwick, and it seems like we do have ourselves the A side in Hardwick, or at least that's what I'm grasping from the way they're promoting this whole thing. Do you tend to agree, and how much do you agree with the line here?
I mean, both these guys come in as stars,
Yep.
Certainly like local and regional stars. They both represent different ethnic demographics, and that's important in terms of how you market and promote fights, right? Like it's no surprise that when somebody's holding up a flag, people feel some type of way, So I think that this is a fight where, going in, why is Hardwick favored? You got to ask yourself that question here. And I think the answer is quite simple and straightforward. He's never been finished, right? And you got another guy who's been finished in all of his losses, right? And he's been knocked out in the first round on a number of occasions. You got a guy in Hardwick who hits very hard, who comes out very aggressive, who picks his shots quite well. And he seems like a really intelligent fighter. You listen to the guy talk, you listen to the breakdown videos that he does. He seems like a guy who's got a real head on his shoulders and knows what he's doing when he's fighting. I loved his commentary on the guillotine. If you guys haven't seen it, go check it out on his Instagram. He talks about the finishing sequence in his last fight where he had a guillotine and gave up on it because the guillotine is a tool, right? It's a good tool. It's a good tool to defend takedowns. It's a good tool to sweep. It's a good tool to finish people, but you could use it for all those things, right? It's a good tool to get back to your feet. That's what it is. It's a tool. It can be applied a lot of different ways. And I feel like Hardwick understood that, right? He went for the choke. He made the guy uncomfortable. He made him have the fear of coming back into the grappling realm so he could get the finish on the feet like he wanted. But in that position, when he felt his shoulders go to the mat, he said, I'm going to let go and get back to my feet. That's the right thing to do. Smart guy. So I feel like Hardwick has shown a lot of the right things that you want to see. His opponent here, I don't want to butcher his name, Al Salwaldy, excuse me. He has a lot of power. He is very athletic. You look at his physical dynamism, right? Fortis MMA checks a lot of boxes, right? Seems like he's doing a lot of things right. But I do feel like he's had his chin tested a number of times. It hasn't been tested since he's came to the American promotions, right? He was over in Brave when he got knocked out. He was overseas. But I do think to myself, when I look at this fight, this is probably a tough spot for him coming in here against Hardwick. It just seems like a tough style matchup, and I feel like he could get another opportunity, but it just feels like Hardwick is probably the guy whose time is now. So I feel a little bit square this week because I feel like right now I'm leaning towards all the favorites pretty much, but it just is what it is, right? Contender Series is very volatile. Some of these guys could slip up, but you got to call it like you see it, and I just feel like Hardwick – a little bit more dangerous, a little bit better, skill set overall right now. So should be competitive though. I think in the early going, it's going to be a competitive fight, but I just feel like he could take the shots a little bit better. So give me Hardwick here.
Hey, no, nothing wrong with picking the favorites. We picked 4 dogs last week, I think it was, between the two of us, right? Or bet on 4 at least. So, hey, it's going to come and go, and we just got to
Hey,
take the fights one by one.
Cesar Almeida. Y'all must have forgot.
Man, if only he could cash my plus 400 KO ticket, man. I thought he had him. I thought he had him. All right, back to this one, though. It's so interesting to see this fight, though, right? We talk about so many low level opponents, even the one before this, where these guys are just fighting absolute cans. These guys are very high level, right? They're champions in their regional scenes as well. Combined opponent records, right? For Salwaldy, 114, 47, and 2. He's got some good experience. 17 pro fights to his name. Then Hardwick, 77 and 28 pro opponents pro record as well. He's going out there. He's fighting some good level of competition. And 26 years old for Hardwick, going to be the bigger guy as well. The immeasurables are on his side, right? The hype, the well-rounded skill set, the better striking, in my opinion. But to me, it just seems like it's his matchup to lose, right? He has all the tools. He's got a good head on his shoulder as well. And I think he has the ability to go out there and put on a good showcase ability against a guy who has been knocked out a few times. Hardwick, what I like most about him is he's just got such a well-rounded game that you're going to have to beat him in all aspects of MMA, which I don't see Salwaldy having the ability to do a lot of the time. Salwaldy does have good power, but he's a lot more reckless, doesn't really have that same technicality on the feet that you want to see from Hardwick. And if I want to go out there and I want to fade Hardwick, it's going to be a guy who can go out there and just control, grapple him, and threaten him on the ground, something that I don't know if Salwaldy has the capability to do. Salwaldy, a great grappler in his own right, a good solid wrestler, but he's more so content to strike in the feet as well. He's not necessarily his bread and butter here, and I don't think he has the, let's say, physicality and athleticism to control a guy in Hardwick who is so smart, so crafty in those positions as well. So on the feet, it's going to be Hardwick moving forward, throwing from all angles, body, head, good ability to mix it up. And I do think that he does win this fight here, and I am picking Hardwick to win it. The problem is how, right? Like if I'm so confident on the Hardwick side of things, and he's a very hefty favorite, how am I playing him this week, right? So the inside the distance line is juiced. Last I looked, it was minus 200 for him to win inside the distance. Salwaldy has good cardio. He's a good ability to mix it up. And yes, he's been finishing all of his losses, but man, I wouldn't be surprised if it did go all 15. And for that reason, I'm a bit scared or hesitating off that minus 200. What are your thoughts on these lines here for method of victory?
Yeah, I mean, they all seem juiced beyond belief. They don't look very appealing to me at all. What's the decision line? 575. Yeah, even that I don't really love. What's the round props? Hardwick round. Oh my God. Yeah, I'll wait till they're opened up on domestics because these are simply unplayable.
Horrendous. Yeah, I didn't even notice those till now. I guess
Plus
the question for me is
245 on round 2. The disrespect.
It's pretty bad. But the question for me is, okay, if I'm gonna play his money line straight up, what's the other thing, like parlay, like you go with this week? Is it the under in the Oslo Renato fight? Probably that seems to be the best option that way. Or do I look for one of the 1,000 different minus 300 favorites on UFC 292 this weekend? There's a ton of options that way. All I know, what do you got?
I would do that. Do that.
There is a lot this weekend, isn't there?
Yeah, and I don't want to give away all the game, but there's definitely I'm like a anti-parlay better. Like, as you know, it's just not my thing. It's not to say that it doesn't work. I always tell people, do whatever works for you. It works for some people. It just doesn't work very well for me, so I normally lay off it. But there was one line that I saw this week, a money line that was just lagging behind the rest of the market that I was like, man, I might have to get in on that. And, my Irish roots were showing, you know what I'm saying? So I'll leave it at that. Y'all detectives out there can put 2 and 2 together. But yeah, there was definitely some bagpipes and, there was some Dublin calling my name. There was a lot of noises in my ear from Ireland, telling me I might need to parlay this weekend.
Hey, I know you do have some content out already. We'll get to that shortly when we do the outros here, but it does seem like we're on the same side here for this main event and one that we wish we could get some better lines on some round props, something like that, but seems to be just seeing how we play this guy who we both favor here. But that's 5 fights, man. 48 minutes. Actually, a card I'm really looking forward to, and I've mentioned 1,000 times this week. This is my final exams week for my class, so I'm not doing any other videos or content this week other than this. happy to break down these fights with you as well. But what we did last week was we went over just quick thoughts on all 5 fights. I'm going to go ahead and do that here. Liam, if you got your notes up, you feel free to do it as well. But for me, first fight of the night, Smotherman Grigoriou. Grigoriou has that path to victory, but to me, he doesn't have the same control grappling that I'd like to see from someone against Smotherman. I think Smotherman's a better technical striker, and gun to my head, I'm going to go out here and pick Smotherman. Aslan is a guy who I think is a much better mixed martial artist. I think there is that threat of him gassing down the stretch, but not at cardio parity and fresh early on round 1. He's the far superior fighter, bigger guy. I'm taking Aslan. Amil, Sonmez has that on paper path to victory with the control, but he doesn't control enough. Gasses down the stretch as well. Amil's super active, super aggressive, great cardio. I think he wears him down and finishes him late. Amil in that one. Moura Silva, no really tape to go off of, but from what I'm seeing, Moura, the more technical grappler, more sound that way, bigger fighter, someone looking to market. Moura should be favored here, but I'm sitting back to see what they have to offer for me here. And then Hardwick, main event, should roll here. The A side of things, more tools to get it done against the guys who been knocked out 3 times. I do think Hardwick wins that way there as well. There's a quick recap for all 5 fights. Liam, do you have anything to share there?
Sure thing, my man. Smotherman, power punches go burr. That's my first breakdown. I think that Aslan and Renato Jr. is a really tricky fight for me. I feel like both guys have some red flags, but I just think the athletic upside on the Aslan side probably makes him the pick to click. Ultimately, the dominance MMA connection, a couple big check boxes I feel like on his side, and also if you're losing to Jamal Pogues, it's just hard for me to really support you based on what we saw from him last time out. No disrespect. Hyder Amil, I think, is going to get the win here. It just seems like an archetype fight to me. One guy who's been broken down the stretch, one guy who breaks people down the stretch. He's been in violent fights. He's been in back and forth fights, difficult fights. He's faced some adversity, and he's come through it and beat the hell out of people and broke them and broke their face and really beat him up. So give me Hyder Amil to break this guy down the stretch, get the win. I think that the women's fight I know the least about, so don't take my opinion too serious here, but give me Eduardo Moura based on being the more marketable fighter, being a little bit more, promotable. And also I think having the grappling upside, competitive purple belt in BJJ. And I think she's going to try and leverage that here. So next up, Hardwick is my pick for the main event. Going square boy this week, going a little bit chalky. And guys, I will just say, sometimes when I go a little deeper on the tape, I see something that goes, oh my God, flashing red light. This was the answer I needed. So I do change my picks occasionally between now and when the fights pop off. I go through my thoughts in very good detail on Patreon, but I have so much research I have to do each week that I can't get everything done before this show. So I'm giving you my best. I'm giving you everything that I have right now, but I just don't stop. I still have until tomorrow before I have to place these bets. So I'm going to continue to do my research overnight. But that's what I've got right now. I'm leaning mostly chalky on this card. And I think that it's a bunch of guys that are violent. So it's not to say that they're all super clear cut, but calling it like I see it, I like the favorites this week.
So do I, man. I like to go out there and pick some dogs. I did last week. Didn't necessarily work out all too good, but we got some favorites in here this week who I do think get it done. And then we'll be back next week anyways. We got 10 weeks this, man. I really do like having DWCS Contender Series on Tuesday night. Every Monday we out here breaking it down. So that's going to do it for us here quickly. Like I said, I'll throw the video, the like button down below, subscribe to the channel, shouting at everybody else here. Dixon's asking how many times do we see Hardwick exposed in the UFC? I know you're harsh on those Cage Warrior guys, and I do think the right archetype of fighter can expose Hardwick, but I do think he's got a good fundamental skill. So I don't know if you have anything to add there, Liam, but I do think that Hardwick's a smart enough guy to win his first couple battles in the UFC.
Yeah, I think they'll probably try and match make him accordingly. I think that he's got a tough enough fight on this one, but I just think that the problem is he can take it a little bit better than his opponent, and I think that against some opponents, maybe more durable guys can really break him down the stretch. It's not like he doesn't get touched a little bit in his fights, but it just seems like he sees the shots better. He picks his shots better. And so I liked what I saw from him. Seems fundamental. And the way that he targets the body, I feel like really messes with guys' rhythm, really gets people off their game. And I feel like that's going to open up headshots as well.
Sounds good. Tend to agree there. You're also being called out for a certain Irishman as well. If you want to see any of that, I know Liam's going to shout out all this stuff here shortly as well. And then appreciate everybody else out tuning in. Frank, Ghost Gardener, everybody else tuning in after the fact. I'm going to make sure I throw some timestamps on this after as well. Make sure it's all good for you guys here. But Liam, that's episode week 2 here, and the first one that plays at Fade's YouTube channel. Happy to have you back here, man. Please, your YouTube's linked down below, but let everybody else know what you got going on this week and where to find all your work.
For sure, man. Appreciate you. It's always a blessing. It's always a blast breaking down these fights. Last week, I wasn't afraid to come in and say, give me Cesar Almeida plus 200. This week, I'm liking the favorite. So calling it like we see it each and every time, but the research is not done, right? I have tons of research already on these fighters in terms of top line stuff, where they're training, who their management is, what their preparation looks like for this fight. But I'm going to continue to build that out overnight in terms of, or mostly tomorrow as well. But in terms of fight tape. So just the grind never stops for me. Right back to work. You can find my work on Patreon. You can find me on YouTube. You can find me on Twitter. You can find me everywhere at LiamPicksFights. God bless you all. Enjoy the fights. Let's get after it and hopefully win some bets tomorrow.
Hey, sounds good, man. I'm definitely looking forward to it. As for me, myself, man, I like I've said a few times, right? Finals week for me, busy time. Not doing any content until they're done on Friday, except for this one. This is one of the ones where it was like, I can do an 11 p.m. video, right? My first midterm tomorrow, or first final, sorry, is not till I think 11:30 tomorrow, so I can time to sleep in. This is my reward after studying all day, and man, I love talking these prospects coming in there, right? So I appreciate you chatting fights with me, and for everybody else. For everybody else out there, that's us robbing the bookies. That's what they're hearing. But no, for everybody else looking for my content, it'll be out probably Friday night, Saturday morning prior to the fight. It's a big UFC 292 card, so make sure you're subscribed and ready to go for that one. But appreciate everybody for tuning in. I wish everyone the best of luck in all your betting endeavors tomorrow. Enjoy the fights, man, and we'll see how many contracts he gives out. Shout out to Liam for joining me. Shout out for all you guys for joining me as well. Let's make some money, guys. Peace.